The punishments for witchcraft were not only horrific, but also deeply rooted in superstition, fear, and religious zealotry, often culminating in some of the most brutal methods of torture and execution ever recorded. One of the most infamous was the burning at the stake, where the accused witch was tied to a post, and wood was stacked around them before being set alight. This execution method was intended to purify the soul by fire, yet for the victim, it was a slow, agonizing death as the flames consumed their body, often leaving them to burn for hours. The act of burning someone alive in public was both a punishment and a public spectacle, designed to instill fear in the community and discourage others from being accused. Equally notorious was the dunking stool, where the accused witch, often a woman, was strapped into a chair and repeatedly dunked into cold water. The belief was that witches would float, a sign of their guilt, but in reality, this method led to countless drownings, with some women dying from hypothermia or drowning from the violent plunges into freezing water. The dunking stool was a symbol of both degradation and terror, forcing the accused into a public display of torture that ended with their death or a broken spirit. Another terrifying device was the Iron Maiden, a large coffin-like structure with spikes lining the interior. When a person was placed inside, the spikes would slowly pierce their skin and vital organs, leading to a painful and prolonged death. The Iron Maiden, although more associated with medieval times, was also used to punish those accused of witchcraft during the height of the witch hunts. Another form of torture, called the strapado, was designed to break the body and spirit of the accused. The victims' arms were bound behind their back, and they were hoisted off the ground, sometimes for hours, their weight pulling painfully on their shoulders and causing their arms to dislocate. This brutal method of interrogation was designed to force confessions from the accused, who were often subjected to it while enduring threats, physical abuse, and starvation. The breaking wheel was yet another horrific punishment used during the witch hunts. The condemned would be strapped to a large wheel, their limbs broken by the executioner before being left to die in agony. This form of execution was meant to symbolize the victim as punishment for defying societal or divine order, and it was often accompanied by public humiliation. These punishments were not just about inflicting pain. They were about control, instilling fear, and serving as stark reminders of the power of the authorities who wielded them. The persecution of witches, particularly in medieval Europe, was also a means of controlling marginalized groups, often women, who were deemed other by society. Accusations of witchcraft were frequently used as a way to explain unexplained events or as a tool to eliminate rivals, especially women who were older, lived alone, or exhibited behaviors deemed abnormal by the society at the time. The brutal methods were designed to break the spirit of the accused and extract confessions, sometimes even from innocent people who were simply caught up in the hysteria of the witch hunts. The Salem witch trials, one of the most notorious witch hunts in history, saw the execution of 20 people in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, with many others tortured and imprisoned. In Salem, the hysteria was fueled by a mixture of religious extremism, jealousy, and the need to control women who were considered threats to the social order. The punishment for witchcraft in Salem included hanging, as well as pressing to death with heavy stones for those who refused to confess. The infamous image of a witch burning at the stake or being hung in the public square was a reminder to the community of the consequences of defying the established order. While some believed that these brutal punishments were necessary to rid society of evil, others argued that they were simply tools of oppression, rooted in fear and ignorance. In many ways, the witch trials served as a precursor to later forms of persecution, showing how mass hysteria and the need to control could lead to the dehumanization and destruction of individuals. The enduring legacy of the witch hunts and the torturous methods used to punish those accused of witchcraft continues to serve as a cautionary tale. These punishments remind us of the dark history of fear-driven justice and the devastating consequences of scapegoating and unchecked power. In the end, the victims were often not only physically tortured, but also socially ostracized, their families torn apart, and their legacies erased from history. Today, the memory of the witch hunts serves as a reminder of the dangers of superstition, mass hysteria, and the abuse of power in the name of faith or control. The brutal punishments for witches were not just about punishing individuals. They were about creating an atmosphere of fear and submission that lasted long after the trials ended. The punishments meted out to those accused of witchcraft were not only horrific, but also designed to break the body, mind, and spirit of the victims in the most excruciating ways imaginable, often with no hope of escape. One of the most notorious forms of execution was burning at the stake, where the condemned were bound to a wooden post and wood or kindling was piled around them before being set on fire. This brutal method of execution was believed to purify the soul, but for the accused, it was a slow, agonizing death as the flames would often burn for hours. Some victims would die from smoke inhalation long before the fire consumed them, while others would endure an excruciatingly long, painful death from the flames. The visual spectacle of burning witches at the stake became not only a form of capital punishment, but also a form of public spectacle meant to instill fear in the community, warning them of the consequences of defying authority or turning to dark practices. The dunking stool, another form of torture, was used in various regions as a way to both humiliate and punish the accused. The accused witch, often a woman, would be strapped into a chair and dunked into water, sometimes repeatedly, in the belief that witches would float, as they were supposedly rejecting baptismal waters. In reality, the dunking stool led to countless drownings, hypothermia, and broken bones as victims were violently submerged and pulled out of the water. Some survivors, after enduring repeated dunkings, would be left too weak to stand, further tortured by the authorities in a twisted attempt to extract confessions or force them into implicating others. The Iron Maiden, a device often associated with medieval torture, was also used during witch hunts. This terrifying contraption resembled a coffin with spikes lining the interior. When a person was locked inside, the spikes would slowly puncture the skin, causing agonizing pain and eventual death. The Iron Maiden was not designed for a quick death, but for prolonged suffering. The victims would bleed out slowly, enduring a slow and painful demise as the spikes would pierce their vital organs. The use of this device during the witch hunts is controversial, as some argue it was more symbolic of the era's cruelty, but evidence suggests it was used in some witch trials to extract confessions, adding another level of terror to an already horrifying time. The stropado, or the rope, was another notorious method of torture, used to dislocate the limbs of the accused while leaving them dangling in a painful position for hours. This method involved tying the victim's arms behind their back and lifting them by a rope, which would often dislocate the shoulders and arms. The victim would be left suspended, screaming in pain as their body struggled to bear the strain. The use of the stropado was especially prominent in the Spanish Inquisition, where the goal was to extract confessions through fear and physical trauma. The torturer would apply pressure, sometimes adding weight to the victim's body, causing the victim's bones to snap or dislocate entirely. The breaking wheel was another brutal execution device employed during the witch hunts. The accused would be tied to a large wheel, their limbs broken by an executioner, before being left to die in public view. This execution was not only about delivering death, but about instilling terror in the community, as the victim's broken body would be displayed in the open, reminding people of the severe consequences of witchcraft. Often, these public executions were treated like gruesome forms of entertainment, with the bodies of the condemned displayed as a stark warning to the public. Many victims died from blood loss or infection, as the breaking wheel was designed not for quick death, but for prolonged suffering. The physical torture was horrifying, but the emotional and psychological toll on the accused was just as devastating. Accusations of witchcraft were often used as a way to eliminate political enemies, settle personal grudges, or control marginalized groups, particularly women. In these cases, victims were subjected not only to physical violence but to intense psychological abuse as well. The Salem witch trials, one of the most infamous witch hunts in history, began in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1692, and the punishments here were no less brutal. Dozens of people, mostly women, were accused of witchcraft, often based on flimsy evidence such as spectral evidence, which claimed that the accused spirit had harmed others. The trials, fueled by fear, superstition, and a rigid religious doctrine, resulted in the executions of 20 people, many of whom were hanged. Others were pressed to death with large stones for refusing to confess, as the court sought confessions from the accused in order to absolve themselves from guilt. These trials reveal the deep paranoia that ran through colonial America and the way religious fervor could be twisted into an instrument of control, leading to the persecution and execution of the innocent. Across Europe, the witch hunts also saw horrific punishments, with Germany and France being some of the most notorious centers for witch trials. The Holy Roman Empire, in particular, experienced some of the worst witch hunts, with trials and executions continuing through the 16th and 17th centuries. Victims were often tortured before being executed with techniques ranging from the use of thumbscrews, rack, and flaying, all used to extract confessions or force the accused to implicate others. These methods were applied indiscriminately, regardless of the age, gender, or innocence of the accused. The women who were considered outcasts or who lived on the fringes of society, often older women or those without male protectors, were often the ones targeted. These women, particularly those who lived alone or had knowledge of healing herbs, were considered suspicious and vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft. Marginalization and misogyny were deeply intertwined with the witch hunts. The punishments were meant to not only punish but also to dehumanize, humiliate, and break the spirits of the accused. The women condemned as witches were viewed as both a societal threat and as a manifestation of evil. Those who were unlucky enough to be accused suffered not just death but a total erasure of their humanity. These methods of punishment, cruel as they were, left an indelible mark on history, showing the dark side of mass hysteria and how fear and superstition can lead to devastating consequences. The witch hunts were not just about executing a few individuals. They were about controlling communities and instilling a deep, pervasive fear that would echo throughout society for generations. The witch trials serve as a grim reminder of the horrors of unchecked power, fear-driven justice, and the lengths to which people can go when they believe they are fighting evil, even at the cost of innocent lives.